Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we continue our coverage of Masters of the Air, and we welcome supervising sound editor Jack Whittaker and re-recording mixer Michael Minkler. Jack and Michael will talk us through how sound played an extremely important part in how the episodes were crafted. Please be warned, there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Jack and Michael. Hi, Jack. Hi, Mike. Nice. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi. Hi, Robert.
We're here to sit down and talk about Masters of the Air, which I'm excited to talk about because being a sort of pseudo sequel and spiritual sequel to the Band of Brothers series, was something that was quite prominent in my household growing up. So, sort of seeing it happen, seeing it come out with a third series, should we say, after so many years, it's kind of like, wow, I can actually talk to people about it and not be some little sort of youngster watching it.
Great. I'd love to talk to you about it.
How have you guys found the reception to the show? Because it is a big show. It probably could potentially, if I run the maths, this probably could be one of the most expensive shows on TV. It's basically feels like something that should be in the cinema, but it's on a TV screen that people are watching at home.
Yes, very much so. It should be in the cinemas, but it was designed to be a limited series. It was designed to be 9 or 10 parts. It turned out to be 9. It does have a budget of a feature film. So yes, it was always intended for that type of film to be made. I don't want to say put it in that class, but obviously a higher budget allows you to freedoms and a slight bit of excess that you wouldn't have been able to afford with a television budget.
Yes, and I think you kind of see that on screen as well with the planes, the fact that they built the planes as well, and technology used for when they're up in the air with the Lux screens. Yeah, it's pretty crazy how quickly they've moved with technology, and I've got a technical question that I've got that I'll save for the end. But how did the project come about for you both, and what made you want to take it on?
Oh, well, I have a long relationship with the production company Playtone, and I also did the Pacific with Playtone and Amblin. The same people that were involved in the Pacific were involved in this. So it was kind of natural for me to do it. I've also done a few of the other Playtone projects in between that. So I I feel part of their family. I like these type of projects. We'd come off of Greyhound 4 years ago. World War II is a big topic with Tom Hanks and Gary Getzman, and I love it myself. I love the topic. I enjoyed doing the Pacific immensely. I was really looking forward to this. It turned out extremely well. It was bigger and better than I thought it could ever be because it took so long to get there. There was only so much that could be done on production because they had to rely on visual effects on the back end. So even though production was enormous, Gary Getzman, the producer, tells me there was a crew of 1,500 people and 3 different sets being shooting at the same time at any given time with 4 different crews. That's a lot. That was enormous. And we pretty much stayed away from any of that during production. We were in communication with the Playtone people. We got to see some footage. But we were here in LA setting up the sound editorial and the picture editorial departments. And then eventually the visual effects department was built here at the Playtone facilities. So we were all getting ready for everything here to land here at the end of production. It did land here slightly ahead of the end of production, but they did make a move, and that's when we started. And then just off we went. I mean, it was we started off with the basic stuff, the basic story, and building the characters, building the locations, building everything with dialogue and sound effects. But the visual effects came in, I wouldn't say slowly, but they came in over a long period of time, over 2 years period of time. So that building process took a lot longer. So we started off, with the basics, and then got more and more into some exciting stuff.
So I joined the production, as Mike said. He has a long relationship with Gary, and Tom has mixed, I think, most of Gary's movies for the last 30 years or something.
Yeah.
So he's part of that Playtone family, and he was looking for a supervisor to work with, and he asked me, and I said yes, I'd love to, because it's such the heritage of this series about World War II from Band of Brothers in the Pacific. It's just a really exciting subject matter to be in, to work on, and so I was absolutely, I'd love to work on it.
And he brought along his British sensibilities.
I won't comment on that just in case I get someone in trouble. But I guess when you have a already working relationship with producers and production companies, I think sometimes it's probably a case of them calling up saying, we're bringing the band back together. So you can't really say no, really. And if you have that relationship, it probably makes it so much easier to say yes, because you know what you're expecting, what's going to happen. But I guess on a project like this, where you're mentioning that the VFX elements probably took so long, took so long that it must have felt like a very different project as well compared to previous ones.
Yes, this one was by far took the longest in visual effects. I'm not sure if it was simply the complexities, the depth of it, the requirements of it all, whether there were failures before there were successes. I don't really know. I wasn't privy to everything. So all I know is that we would work on an episode, get it all roughed in, put all the necessary things that were in, and then we would send it back to the cutting room, and then we'd go on to the next episode. And so then after the cutting room got a hold of it, they would send it back to us, and a lot of times 200 or 300 visual effects would show up. And then we would just keep repeating that process, and it was a revolving door. When you have 9 episodes, you never know. We never knew which one we were going to be working on. We would spend 3 or 4 or 5 days on one, and out the door it would go, and something else would come back. Something would be on our plate for the next 3, 4, 5, 6 days, and then out the door it goes, and it just kept revolving over and over and over, and dozens of times. But always it would come back with a fresh cut of whether the performances were changed, story changed, or the VFX changed. So it was unlike any other project I've ever done that was continually growing sideways or forwards. It didn't matter. I mean, it was never growing backward. I mean, it never retreated back to something that it wasn't. It was always moving forward into something that it could be. And that would cause us to record new dialogue, to record new music, and create new sound effects. Then Jack can attest to all of this. What started off a basic variety of sound effects that we knew we needed, then he and his team of sound designers would get in there and start to create the really cool stuff based on the authenticity of the natural sounds that we went out and recorded. B-17s, other planes, other mechanisms, other everything.
Yeah, like Mike's saying, we started off, we joined the production, and there were very, very rough drafts of VFX when we first started, grayscale and drawings in some cases. So we started off by building a library of what we had, and then knew that we needed to record a plane/planes. Thankfully, we through production and Apple and Playtone, we're able to get access to a plane in Arizona, and we went out and recorded that with my crew and sound effects recordists for, I think it was 3 or 4 days, and just recorded absolutely every single thing we could on that plane, from the interior and the exterior. Took that material back, listened to it. Also, we all, Mike, myself, and Dave McMoyler, the ADR supervisor, and Duncan McRae, the effects re-recording mixer, we all got to go up in that plane and fly in it. So we all got to actually live that experience and hear what those things are like in person. And that was really beneficial for all of us, I think, because we got to feel the character of the piece of machinery. So we took that back, started building on that soundscape.
With the show being a period drama, where do you guys begin in your research? Because you're mentioning about going out and recording sounds, and going out to Arizona to check out the planes, but I guess because there's such a big difference in time between then and now, do you guys just have a little bit more creative freedom on how you want it to sound, or do you specifically try to curate your research so that you could be as historically accurate as possible?
We definitely tried to ground this production in the reality of the time and the show, with all of the sounds in the show, actually, and actually in the scope of how it was mixed as well. I think we tried to not lean into, we tried to be, it was like to me, it was a classical piece of filmmaking, the whole show. It's big Hollywood drama, and we tried to, that was the sound we were going for.
We wanted authenticity.
Yeah.
At all costs, but there sometimes when the authentic sound really isn't that cool, could be better. In fact, many times, I could say most times, we can improve on anything, but we didn't want to like throw it out and just put in our own. No, we started with the authentic sound and just made it better. Jack and his team.
Yeah, that was definitely the ideology that we were going for,
including the small things like, switches, skids, the mechanisms of the airplane, the Jeeps, the trucks, the gear that the guys were wearing. Everything is authentic, but it's augmented, and it's gone through the hands of sound designers, because we wanted the sound to have an emotional value to it. We didn't want to just put a sound in because it was there. There's something on screen that needs to have a sound. A switch is a switch. No, we'd like to have that switch. We would like it to have some character to it. If it means something, it's like, here we go. And these switches are going to sound so cool when they're bam, 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 bam on a takeoff, that kind of stuff. It's all the little nuances as well as the big stuff wanted to have an emotional value to it. You get into the air battles and you have the flak and you have gunfire, you've got explosions, crashes, mid-air crashes. There's a shot of a body hitting the wing of a B-17, a body that had been falling through the sky, been blown out from another fortress. So, what sounds do you put for this at that particular moment? And sometimes you lean on the music, sometimes it's the sound effects, and sometimes it's the dialogue elements. We never know until we start playing, and we literally play and play and play and play.
I always imagine, because you can't see sound, and when you're describing it to people, I think it's probably one of the hardest things to describe, because you can't see it, you can't really describe what you want something to sound. So I always think of when you're talking about a scene is like in layers. So you have the first layer of the, say like the planes running. The second layer is what people would be doing in the background. Third layer would be the dialogue between crew. And then fourth layer would be something like flak that you'd be hearing, which has probably been specifically designed to be like exploding all over somebody's home system as well, because it's happening all around them. But I guess as well, what's like quite really interesting as well to hear is like how much more character and depth you wanted to make things feel like on the screen. So like the switches, and as you can even play around with the sound so that audiences actually understand, oh, there's an issue with a plane. As someone who's not really aware of what issues might occur on a plane, you can start playing around with the engine failure or the sputtering, or even maybe something else is happening in the background. So, as you said, a body hitting the plane. And I guess as well, like with something like sound, you can manipulate so much more to what audience are seeing and give them that visceral experience.
You tapped into something here. Before the age of visual effects, when you shot a movie, you had what was in the can. The shot's the shot. You're not going to change it. You could treat it up a little bit with some color treatment, but basically the shot was the shot. Sound has always been able to change and be anything that it wanted to be in filmmaking process. So, okay, so 50 years ago, almost 50 years ago, when visual effects started coming in vogue, where everyone wanted to start to use visual effects as a gimmick, or not a gimmick. I take that back. No, to create a world that didn't exist before, one that we don't know. So you can create a new world with visual effects. But then now you can create anything with a visual effect. You can create a human being. You can put his hand. You can create his foot, his head, the car, the building. Everything can and sometimes are a visual effect. And those can change on a daily basis now. Well, sound can change on a daily basis, always could, but now we really can. So they're actually just catching up to us. So they can go and change, their visual effects now. They can change the background, the content of a shot all day long. Well, so can we. And we do. And sometimes they follow us. Many times in this process, we created something in the sound effects landscape or in the dialogue. We would switch around the dialogue and make it do different things and work with the music and the sound effects. And the picture editing department would get a hold of it and they'd say, hey, now we just got an idea and for visual effects. So we started to steer visual effects instead of us following them. They were now following us. So both worlds are now constantly creating in this type of environment. That's what we had before us. And it was such a wonderful gift.
I think I think I was speaking to another VFX supervisor on the show called The Last of Us, and they were explaining how sound actually played a big part in one of the scenes they're creating because they weren't sure how to do something, and then the use of sound helped them create the suspense in it. And it's quite funny that you mentioned how you basically are the trailblazers for everybody else with what you're creating, and how as a visual medium you would think it's the visual that's leading the way of how the scene should be presented, but then I guess it's the mechanisms of sound can change the way a scene can be cut, the way that, as you said, you can manipulate people's dialogue. So at one point you could mishear a dialogue so that could be confusing of the situation, or you can have someone screaming the dialogue to then be like to create more of urgency in the situation. I think sound has such a interesting way of manipulating how people feel and take in the scene, that I think sometimes it might be slightly underappreciated because people aren't realizing how much is going on.
Yeah, including with the dialogue. I mean, we put pauses in performances. We could change people's performance all the time, and sometimes the actors will come in and we'll show them a playback of an episode or something, and they're like blown away, like, what you did there to my performance. Oh, they see it, they hear it, because we manipulated their performance with their using their dialogue, or using a sound effect, or using some music to enhance it, or to change it, to flip it a little bit, make it feel something different than it had been intended. Right off the bat, I can tell you right now, where the very first scene of flight combat in episode 1, there is, within the first, okay, starts off in the first 4-minute scene is in a bar, but then we cut really hard to a nosedive of B-17, where they're trying to put out a fire by going as fast as they can in a nosedive, and trying to, hopefully the cold air will put the fire out. During that time, the actor who was in that scene was acting as if he was passing out, because that's how he had been directed, because that's what can happen to a pilot in that situation. And so you can see him start to fade into passing out. But we changed the dialogue to give it so he wasn't passing out, he was actually doing something else. He had changed his mind. The character himself had thought of another idea and said, let's do that, instead of pass out. So a simple thing like that, it was just changing a couple of words, changed that scene. And it caused the picture department to make a little adjustment. And anyway, those are the types of things that happen, and would happen all day, every day.
Did you guys ever do like a tally, or like a dollar jar or something, to be like, oh, we've changed it again, so they need to go back and make amendments to it all?
No. I mean, there were days when we would get 2,000 changes.
Wow.
So no, we didn't have enough money for that.
In terms of when you do get something like we have 2,000 changes in a day, do you ever feel like something like that could be quite overwhelming, to know that there is so many little kinks to iron out that you need to work on? Or is it a case of let's just get to it and improve the scene?
It's always you take the changes and you start working through them, and those changes will inform new ideas, and you gotta pay attention to the new ideas, and not fall into a mentality of just changes. That's the real creative discipline, I think, is maintaining a fresh eye to these things when they change a lot. That's a big thing.
And how to stay on budget, or within the expectations of a budget. Obviously, the budget changed every week because the job changed every week. So every week, Jack was making a new budget and a new schedule. And this is what we're going to be doing for the next 3 weeks or the next 3 months. And that would change Jack's managerial skills. He'd figure it out how the editorial process could change, and how the mixing process. And I put my 2 cents in. And I think we can get it done here and there and there. That would happen pretty much every Monday morning. Was how do we deal with these new set of challenges?
When you do get something like that, because I know budget talk's not very sexy when it comes to filmmaking, and no one really likes to talk about it. I think that's probably the best way to sum it up. But how do you go about it to make sure that you stay on budget, or if there are times where it might potentially go over, but you will need to justify those extra costs? What are those conversations like? Or is it a case of just hoping somebody's in a good mood on that day?
Well, we're all working. Everyone working on the show is working together, so that's always the way on all these big productions that we work on. We're working towards the vision of the filmmaker, and so it's always about helping produce that vision for the filmmaker. And so it's always a conversation about changes of schedule, budget, creative ideas, whatever. I mean, I will just say it's a conversation that we have, and I wouldn't we were working with filmmakers that were very receptive to the needs of the show.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because again, that's another thing that probably doesn't really come to mind is stuff like budgets, which people need to sort of keep to and work towards too, and especially when like I can imagine it when it comes to like the shooting side. I've had the experience of seeing what like a shooting side budget is, but like I have no idea what a post side is. So it's quite interesting to hear what's like the ways that you guys will be working around it or how we'll be working towards it. But then there's also something that needs to be kept in the back of your mind as well whilst working away.
Absolutely, we were always working to be, you know, fiscally responsive on these things. They spend a lot of money, and we pay attention to that.
Yeah, and I can imagine as well, though, as well, it can be kind of scary if you're dealing with all those budgets and figures, and the constant changes as well. It probably might keep you up at night sometimes just to make sure that it's on course.
Yeah, I mean, look, when movies get busy, there's lots of things that will keep you awake at night. But this was a great show. I mean, look, this is one of the biggest things that's been made for streaming to be on the smaller screen ever. I believe it's up there, and yeah, I mean, there were many challenges, and the budget is one of them. So
I can only imagine. But I want to get to a point that Mike mentioned earlier about making it sound cool. Now, the funny thing about sound is we as audience members, if you went on the street now, you'd be very accustomed to the sound of a car turning, driving around, or the sound of doors opening. But when it actually comes to creating those sounds for screen, they're not actually, sometimes they're not actually the case that it's a car driving past. It's something completely different. So when it comes to a show like this, where you have planes, mechanisms, propellers, jeeps driving past their gear, how do you go about creating that sort of audio language in the show? And were there any happy accidents in terms of when creating sound? So I guess one example is I had another sound designer who was driving once and he was driving on like the chevrons on the highway slash motorway where it makes a loud sound that will wake you up.
yeah,
Um, and he said that was perfect for a tank sound that he wanted to use. Did you ever have those sort of happy accidents as well whilst working?
yeah. The great thing about this show is that from this period is that everything makes the machinery all makes quite a lot of noise, and is also has a ton of character in the sound of those noises in a way that sometimes modern societies cars don't sound how cars did, and the same for planes and so forth. So we were really lucky in that way to be able to build this palette, and we always tried to impart as much sonic character to any event, and there's tens of thousands of events in these episodes, you know, and we try to always help the drama and the story and the energy of the piece, and we tried to make every sound an interesting sound. We didn't just put in a car or a door or whatever. We played around with trying to make those as interesting sonically as possible. In terms of happy accidents, I'm trying to think. We used I mean, I wouldn't say it was an accident. We used the sound of corrugated iron, a corrugated iron shack in a windstorm in the desert as one of the elements for the interiors of the plane. We used all kinds of shaking and vibrating things to really pull that character forward. And with the propellers, we were cutting and designing those propellers with the concept of the B-17. When you're on the B-17 or outside or near a B-17, it has a lot of different sounds of the plane, at the same time. So it's not just one sound. It's actually you sort of hear several things at once, and we tried to convey that in the plane in terms of spectrum, sound frequency, and in distance. So yeah, we played around a lot. There's always happy accidents, of course. Yeah.
And trying to get things in rhythm to the music or create our own rhythm. So rather than have, we're hearing something for the first time, we're saying a particular sequence of events, and it's got all the things that it needs, but what it's missing is a rhythm. We'd give it a rhythm somehow, figure a way, because it just feels better. There was a couple of times we were thinking about putting in not a comical sound effect, but a sound effect out of a comical animated type sound. But that just led us to, we can do a dramatic sound, but with that type of element. So take the comedy out of it, but it still gave us the idea, the thought that we can still use that. I don't want to tell you what, but anyway. I mean, there were times when we had some fun on the stage and we would put in comedy sounds. But sometimes those things would come back and give us a new idea.
I guess as well, if you're playing around with certain comedic sounds, you can get an idea of maybe tweaking things to see how it could be, or you could have a good laugh in the sound suite if you put in like when they're turning on a switch and it's like a boink, and it's like, okay, that you can have a nice little laugh about it and then work around it. But I guess
Okay. Well, I'll give you for instance. There was a shot that is it goes into a slow-mo, and it's a German fighter, and he comes by Rosenthal's plane, and they come really close to one another, and it freezes, and he goes in super, super, super slow motion as if Rosenthal can actually see him. It's like a ball player looking at a pitch, where he says you can see the rotation. He just slows down the reality. So it slows down Rosie's reality, and he sees the German pilot in slow-mo. And then it goes back into normal speed. Well, we were joking around with the Roadrunner, meep, bing, right? On one cut, and just for ourselves. And then they came back with the latest and greatest sound version of that shot, and it was in our mind. We didn't use that at all because there was no sense for any kind of comedy at that particular moment. However, that away has a feeling of, of the Roadrunner speeding away. So that was a little accident kind of thing. Those things happen all the time.
I guess that's like a way of having a bit of fun with your work, and then how you can play around with sound. That if you can have that unique sort of sound, and then it's like maybe if we change it, and then you can also get ideas coming from it, because you're just sort of like throwing darts and a wall to get an idea of like, we can maybe add this, add that. Maybe if we changed it to this, it could enhance it, or somebody might have like a light bulb moment as well from the creativity of it all.
There was a lot of light bulb moments, at least for me, and I think the other guys too, in the middle of the night. And I'd come in the morning, almost 99% of the mornings I came to work, I was completely, totally enthusiastic with a smile on my face because I had an idea. And it was like almost every single day. It was great.
When you have those ideas come to you at night, do you ever get a bit more fidgety and annoyed that you can't go straight to work to get these ideas down? Because sometimes I think that's the worst, is when you're about to just drift off, and then boom, you get an idea, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I can't sleep because this idea is gestating too much, and I need to sort of get it down and not forget it either.
No, I like to let those ideas gestate for a little bit, because half of them aren't any good. Give me a few hours to think about it.
Fair enough. I think again, that's still quite interesting to hear those, and going in the next day with those ideas and having that fresh slate. What I'm curious to know about as well in terms of like sounds on the plane and the different elements that are involved, because you've got the sound of a plane, you've got the score going on, you've also got dialogue. Now, because this is being streamed on TV, how do you go about making sure that stuff like the dialogue is not the sound of the dialogue is not too overwhelmed by the other sounds of the plane or other actions that are happening on screen?
That is tens and tens of thousands of decisions made on during the process and the mix, and it's a constant. The mixers are constantly battling against that to try and hear everything, but just the right thing at the same time. It's a real. I mean, it's a balance. It's a bit of magic, really.
Yeah, it's every frame.
Yeah.
Every frame is telling a different story, but every frame is so therefore every frame needs to have something happening, and it can be the dialogue or the music or the sound effect or the silence or the whatever. I mean, it's got to happen, and it's going to shift that rapidly on a frame by frame basis. And if you got a bad musical note or a bad sound effect in there or a bad piece of dialogue, get rid of it. You don't need it. It's not helping you. It's taking out the flow of what's happening. It's taking the attention away from something that's happening. So every frame is very specific as to what we want you to hear, because we have to have a pointer. We also did a lot of experimentation of how we could take a theatrical Atmos mix, which is how we started. So a lot more speakers, a lot more power, and convert it down. And we didn't once want to push a button and convert it down. So after a couple of months of being in theatrical Atmos, we started experimenting with home theater Atmos and home theater sound bars, basic television sets, home theater systems, headphones systems. How should we best crunch this down carefully, what still maintains all the stuff that we've just put in it, and still live in a home theater world? It took months of playing around, but we had the time because, as I said, there was this revolving door of these episodes going in and out and in and out and in and out, and so we had time to experiment while we're working, because we had a lot of different rooms set up that we could sneak off into and take a little listen to hear while somebody's doing this and that type of thing. So we experimented for a long time.
When you're running those sort of experiments, what was the sort of what was the most surprising thing that you found? And I was going to say saw, but I think best thing is actually heard. Sorry. I know it's a very open-ended question because it's like there's probably so many different things.
Well, yeah, I was surprised every single day. I was surprised on how some scenes sound on a small sound bar versus a large sound bar versus a regular TV versus a 7-1 home theater system versus, it was like every day was like, is it the streaming process that we're doing? Is the crunching down process? Is it the mix process? Is it the speakers? Are the speakers located properly? I mean, so it was aggravating. That was the most aggravating part of the entire journey. But we came to a consensus. We all kind of said, okay, this is what we're going to do. So we adjusted the mix accordingly to fit as many systems as possible. And by adjusting the mix, there was a lot of adjustments, a lot of sound effects adjustments, music adjustments, and dialogue adjustments, so that everything could live as we intended it to live.
Okay, so again, the difference that you get from being in the cinema to then being at home to then being on your commute to work, or somewhere else, it's like you don't realize that the different quality of speakers and sound that you're getting, because you just want to sort of consume it as easily as possible. But I guess as well with people's home systems becoming better and better as the years go by, it probably helps a little bit as well.
Yeah, and this show is meant to be, as I think you said at the beginning of the podcast, this was really a big movie on a streaming platform, and so we want it to be as dramatic as possible, and the filmmakers and the studio want it to be as dramatic and as exciting and theatrical as possible. So that is a challenge, big challenge that we spend a lot of time on.
What I'm curious to know about as well is like the collab, because it's a TV show that has various different creatives. So you have different directors for different episodes. You have an overall producing team that oversee everything. But what's the like collaboration like with the different directors? And then on top of that, are you also talking to any military advisors about how certain sounds might be in the background if they're in training or at an army base?
Yeah, absolutely. We had the series is written by John Orloff, and he was on the show. He wrote the show 15. He was on the show for 15 years, writing the scripts. And then we had military advisors on the show that we lent into and asked a lot of questions. And we had an executive producer on the show who also Kirk Sadusky, that helped a lot with a lot of these questions. So we did lean into that knowledge base as much as we could, and they were great with it. Gary Getzman it's his show along with Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, and he really is the gel that keeps this thing going, this machine working, and we worked a lot with him.
Yeah, so two things. We had access to the military advisors all the way through. They were just at the other end of the phone. We could call them any time of the day or night. And Jack did a lot. So, and that was all throughout the entire process. Right up to the last day, we were asking questions. As far as working with the other teams, with the directors, with the other teams of directors and the teams of editors, we didn't have to do that because Playtone brought all of their goods into their world. And so we only worked in the Playtone world. So we never got to meet these people. I would love to, eventually I would like to meet these people. I've never met the directors or the editors, the picture editors. And they did great work. But it all went into the Playtone home, and that's where we were. So we only had to deal with, it was essential to Gary to only have to deal with one entity, which is Gary and his editor. So they would siphon all the information through, everything would go through them.
Okay, cool. I guess that makes things so much easier that you're not dealing with too many cooks. And if you're going over different episodes as well, that you've got that sort of streamlined communication. Plus, it's probably their baby as well, so they want to make sure that it's nurtured and looked after properly.
Yeah, the directors all screened the show, their episodes many times. They were hearing the work and giving feedback, but it was coming via the Playtone Amblin.
Yeah, we never talked to them, but the Playtone cutting room did give them cuts and mixes all the time. So it was up to Gary to deal with that. We didn't have to. It would have been a little, we had enough to deal with. So it was a wonderful experience that way.
Yeah, and I guess it could be confusing as well if you have director from episode 2 saying this and then director from episode 7 saying something else. Then
we treated them as if all those episodes were our babies.
Yeah.
Because we gave them all as much love as we could.
Well, no, that's the important thing, right? You want to take that pride in your work. I do want to ask 2 more questions before we wrap up because I don't want to take too much more of your guys' time, which I really appreciate. So the first one is, what was the hardest scene to work on, sound-wise?
The hardest scene, I would say, all the failure, the plane. There's 4 or 5 planes failing in the show. That was challenging. They're all different challenges in their own way. In terms of a scene and concept changing, I would say the first air sequence was a challenge. And in terms of just overall, constantly trying to make the plane live and be as big as possible whilst still being able to hear the dialogue and the music, that was a big challenge, because we tried to play the plane up in this show rather than just let it fade away. It was we are on the planes with the crews are on, and it's part of the crew. So we wanted to hear the planes all the time.
Yeah, in an immersive format, audio format, so that it's not just, in some movies you might just play a mono or LCR plain sound and with the extra accoutrements here and there. This thing was all around us in utilizing all the speakers to various degrees. When you hear multiple engines, and as Jack says, when those engines are failing, you hear them failing in the various speakers, and you hear chaos happening all around you. And the engines it's massive. It's the whole cacophony of war, that madness is all around you at all times. So it's very difficult to get a good balance all by itself to tell that story. And then you got to add all the dialogue and the music. It's tough road.
I guess as well, like if you're watching a show where they're on a plane, you'll just have that constant plane tone, right? Of them just being, and there'll be maybe a bit of turbulent sound as well. Whilst here, you have to create that chaos as well with what's happening outside. There might be some sort of still and calmness in the plane, but so what's happening outside, and I think with the flak as well, when you're hearing it sort of left, right, and center.
There's very little still and calmness. Because the engines are going. They shut down a lot because they're damaged.
And you do feel like the sense of how big they are as well, with the sound, with how the planes sound. That then they are in a flying fortress ready to complete their mission.
Yeah. And by the way, all of these incidences that are dramatized within all 9 episodes, except maybe the love scenes, but everything that happened. They're in a book. They're in memoirs. This is not made up by the writer. This is adapted from original material. So it was our duty to recreate what really happened. The terror, the fear, the horror. It's not us, it's not the filmmakers creating something just for the sake of being cool or being artistic or something. This is all real. Everything happened, including the scene of the guy whose body was flying through the air and slams into the wing of a fortress and gets sliced in half. I mean, that is actually happened.
And I guess as well, because these are all true stories in real life, you need to be as respectful as possible and want to be true to the story as well. I think it's incredible when you do think about all these stories from different wars and what people went through. It's kind of whatever problems you've had that day feel very insignificant, really.
Absolutely.
So then you kind of take what they've said and it's just like, wow, okay. And there's me thinking I had a bad day because they ran out of sandwiches at the canteen, for example. My final question is more of like a technology one. There's a podcast where Elliot Koretz talks about working with Michael Mann on Collateral, where on Collateral they were shooting on digital, and they said once with the digital, I'm slightly paraphrasing what's said, so excuse me, but it's because they started shooting on digital, the depth of field became greater. So as sound designers, you could play with the sound more, because if an audience member sees somebody walking in the background, you could put their footsteps in, for an example. Now with Masters of the Air, they shot on Lux, which is the LED screens where they would shoot on the Lux with the LED screens for when they have scenes in the air. Now, as sound designers with this new tech and having that ability to have more of an idea of how things would look and feel on screen, how does that affect you when it comes to creating the sounds?
I suppose Mike should start this question because
I don't think what they were doing on location on this show during production, what they were being shown on the screen, if that's what you're talking about, those LED screens, that has no bearing of what is actually in the movie. That was just something to get the boys to react to. It had nothing to do with the actual visual effect or the actual events that take place within the actual the 9 episodes. No, I don't. It had no bearing whatsoever. They were just things to make the actors react. Very similar in what you on a picture I did called Black Hawk Down, where Ridley gave blank rounds of ammo to everybody on the set, and so that there would actually be gunfire to make people wince. There were little things that would go off on the ground, little tiny explosions that would cause the dirt to fire up or something like that. Again, to make people react, to make people duck, to make there's hundreds of people on the set shooting guns, okay, and some of them would get really close to you, and it was to make the actors feel the danger. But of course, it was all then redone in visual effects and sound effects. But it's a tool. Directors use different tools to get those reactions from people. Those guys sometimes were just sitting in a makeup cockpit. It's on a gimbal, and there's nothing else. There's no danger there. I mean, it's moving around and stuff, but then they're being shown a plane or an explosion or something just to give them something to react to.
Yeah, we're always in sound. You know, this could be a science fiction movie from the technology used. You know, everything is added. I mean, there's many scenes in those battles where once you with the ADR that went in, there was a lot of ADR in the air sequences. There's whole chunks of those air sequences which are completely mute. All the sound that you hear is additional and new. But yeah, we're always building universes and expanding out and telling the story off screen, and the sounds that they're seeing and reacting to. We're always building those things out, creating that stuff. Yeah.
Okay. I was just something that was really curious that I heard a few weeks ago, and I really wanted to sort of find out if that's the case when it comes to new tech being introduced into the filmmaking process.
I mean, I will say that's an interesting thing because we both know Elliot Koretz and Mike mixed that movie and Collateral. So, you know, that I'm aware of that depth of field and the landscape of LA opening up, and it does give you this new ability to see things and therefore have a new perspective on it. But I think Mike touched on that at the beginning, that sound has always done that. I mean, it has done that for many, many years. It's always been a 3D thing, or sorry, it's been a 3D thing for 30 plus years.
Yeah, sound can create an illusion much easier than the picture could. Of course, now picture is caught up. Picture creates the illusion as well as sound does, but we've always done that. You know, directors need to know the importance of using sound in movies because it's part of the illusion that they're trying to create.
So that's what I deliberately asked that question because I knew Mike worked on Collateral. So I thought I'd see if I could maybe potentially dig into some goldmine of info there. But then also with the sound thing as well, I think the best way is like if it's when you think you hear something and you don't know if you hear something. So I don't know if you ever guys have come back from a late night and then you're walking and you can hear something like the train in the background and you don't know if it actually is the train or if it's just you being like, did I hear that correctly? Because of how sound travels and how effective it can be in your psyche as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the psychological context of any sound at any given time is you can make 1,000 different genres in your brain of what you hear. It can be a comedy or a horror.
A brilliant early in my life, the film that knocked me for a loop was using sound to create the illusions was Alien, the original Alien. There's like a whole 10-minute section in there that's just sounds. It's terrifying. You don't see anything. Fabulous use of sound.
Yeah, and you're just there immersed into all of it, and it doesn't, and even to this day, that like it's still, but it's just as effective as it was when I probably saw it all those years ago.
Yeah.
Jack, Mike, thank you so much for your time today. Masters of the Air is streaming now on Apple TV Plus. Go out and listen to Mike and Jack's work. Appreciate it and enjoy it. Thank you again, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Robert.
Thank you again. You guys take care and bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.